Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes for people to join the webinar, and then we shall begin. People are filtering in now, so as I say, give it a few minutes, and then we shall start this afternoon's webinar. Just while we wait for the other people to join, this will be recorded, so we'll be sharing it at the end as well. Also, please take a note of mine and Matt's email addresses there. Feel free to contact us on those addresses. So we'll give it a couple more minutes.
And also you have a Q&A section. So if you have any questions, just feel free to send them through this and we will answer everything at the end of the webinar.
Okay. So it's 2 minutes past. I think we'll start around 4 minutes past. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, I think we shall begin. So thank you everyone for joining this afternoon's webinar. This is the second in a series of 3. Matt and I ran one in September, so feel free to go back and have a look at that. Today's webinar is going to be focused on, would your organization fail an Active Directory security assessment? So my name's Dan Bowdry. I'm the Sales Director for UK and Ireland for Semperis. And I'm joined by Matthieu Trivier, one of our senior solutions architects based in northeastern France, Nancy. So the agenda for today's webinar will be as follows. So if you'd like to move on, please, Matt. Thank you very much. So really, we're going to focus on today on why is our identities at the heart of our security strategy. So we'll talk around that. We'll introduce you to Purple Night and what that looks like. We'll go through some demonstrations. We'll explain what the zero logon vulnerability looks like, and we'll do some demos for you. And then we can really talk about how we as Semperis can help you through that. But today's webinar is really going to be knowledge sharing for you guys. You're going to be able to take away some very useful bits of information. We hope that you'll be able to use back in your organizations moving forward. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a recap. We shared this slide in the last webinar, and it's really around the types of attacks or the level of attacks we're seeing in the UK over the last year or so. So the level of attacks has increased a lot in the last year. You guys would have seen lots of them in the press. It's now the case that we all know someone or an organization that's been affected by a data breach, by some kind of cyber criminality. Again, it's becoming more and more common. The average cost here doesn't even show the whole story either, because obviously repeat attacks are becoming more and more prevalent. And again, as we go through the demonstration and showing you some examples, that will become apparent. But it's a really key takeaway for you guys to understand that the cyber gang's business model does revolve around repeat attacks. Again, we'll go into that in more detail. Okay, so let's have a look at today's risks. If you think about the pandemic, it's really opened up the way for remote working. Okay, I mean, I've not yet been back to an office. I'm not sure you guys have. Some people have, some people haven't. But really what it means is that we're working remotely. We are accessing all of our critical applications on multiple devices. We're using different identities from different areas. Okay, so the landscape has dramatically changed, and our reliance on single sign-on, on our credentials, has never been higher. So we're logging onto our phones, we're logging onto our laptops, and from there, we're accessing our core business applications. And with that, the landscape for risk has vastly increased. Okay, so the world's move to remote life has significantly contributed to these risks. And this is why one of the major reasons we're here today is to talk about how you mitigate against that. A key takeaway for you guys from this webinar is this year marks the 4th consecutive year that the organizations have suffered weak attacks to their security identity sources. So it's really important that you take that message away with you this afternoon. So moving on, the keys to the kingdom. So what do we mean by that? So if you think about how we work today, we log into Active Directory, and from there, we then pass on to all our respective SaaS solutions, which our companies subscribe to. Okay, so I'm sure you guys log in the morning, go off to Microsoft 365 for your email, for example. You might use G Suite, you might use AWS, but you're using SaaS-based resources. And the primary credential source for those is often Active Directory. Now, if you look at this slide, it says 90% of the world's enterprises rely on Active Directory today. So if we know that and you know that, then I can guarantee you that cyber criminals know that as well. And we're seeing this globally. We'll give you some examples of which as we go through the webinar. So moving on. So before we jump into a demo, okay, we need to understand what we've picked up so far and what we know already. Okay, so your cloud identities are an extension of your on-premises identities. So when you log on, we know that we're moving off into the cloud, and what we're seeing is vertical movement from the bad guys. So once you've compromised an Active Directory account, we're seeing those accounts used to go up into OneDrive, into SharePoint Online, into Exchange Online, all of these traditional cloud resources that you're used to using. So it's really, really important that you look after your key identity store, which in this case is Active Directory. Year-on-year rises in identity-driven cybercrime targets affecting Active Directory itself. So if you guys have been following the press this week, you would have seen that Sinclair Broadcasting Group, a US television broadcasting company, specifically stated in their press releases that they've been attacked, and that attack did focus on Active Directory. And this brought down their ability to broadcast TV programs, films, etc. We've seen Tesco at the weekend have been hit with some kind of cyber attack. We don't yet know what that comprises of, but we can be pretty sure that there's going to be an element of an Active Directory compromise in there at some point. So these are real world situations that are happening today. As I said earlier, vertical movement is now becoming the norm. If you think about traditional cyber attacks, it would be coming into an environment and it would move laterally onto applications to steal data. But now people are moving vertically to the cloud, and they're getting their hands on maybe less secure data in the cloud, but still equally as damaging to organizations. So if you're not looking after the keys to the kingdom, then you're in a big world of trouble. So at that point, I'll hand over to you, Matt, to run your demo, and then I'll join you guys later on for the rest of the webinar.
Yep, thanks, Dan. So moving on. So why AD is a target? Basically, AD is weak by design, because now AD is like 20 years old. It has been introduced in 1996, rolled out with Windows 2000 Server Edition. So it wasn't designed to face the actual threat that we know. And basically also think about AD design at the moment, they are at least 10 years old. So there's a movement right now for people to focus on, making them up to date, moving into what we call, tiering model or zero trust approach. But lots of actual production design are still 10 plus years. So, it's very easy for attacker to gain access and then, start compromising the environment. So this is just by design. And also, it's something that just works. For years, people have been thinking that, hey, just AD is just working. So why would you care about it? It's just working just on the side. It's just a Windows service. But that's wrong. Now people need to understand that we need to focus on AD, make sure it's secure, because as Dan said, that's basically the key of the kingdom. And also today, finding someone that has skills on AD is a challenge, really a challenge, because for years people have been just managing AD like standard system engineer that can do everything, from virtualization to AD to whatever. AD is a business critical application, and we need to consider it as one and as the key. And if you don't do that, well, you open the door for the bad guys. So if you were part of the first webinar that we ran a few weeks ago, I was proposing a level 1, level 2, level 3 improvement strategy. And if you remember the first one, that was just first perform a vulnerability assessment on your AD, and then patch your domain controller. Those two bullet points will resonate a lot today because we will focus on both. So to address the first one, Semperis released a few months ago, back in March, a tool that is called Purple Knight. Purple Knight is a vulnerability assessment solution that is a free solution. So I will invite everybody to connect, purple-knight.com. You can request download, you can use it freely. The goal is really to raise awareness about AD security. What we will do with this is basically scan the AD environment for about 75 indicators of exposure, indicator of compromise, and make sure that, having an idea of the situation in AD at the moment. And I can bet that you will have a bad score. Why? Because over the last about 60 assessments I did over the last few months, the average score was, 57. So, 57 is definitely not a good score. Kind of a bad one. And, we are also providing guidance on how to increase that score, identifying which objects are targeted by vulnerability or misconfigurations, and also how to improve that score to get in a better position. Basically, you need to think about Purple Knight as, best form of defense is attack. So let's mimic what an attacker could do. And basically, you can run Purple Knight from any workstation in the domain without any privileges, just a normal authenticated user. And then after, the tool will try to do some discovery in the environment. So that's basically the first step after compromising a first workstation that an attacker would do to try to discover all the misconfiguration, all the vulnerabilities that exist in the environment, to do then after lateral movement or escalation of privileges. So it could also be used, sometimes it's not a pen test, not designed to be a pen test solution, but it could also use to test some EDRs or some IDS probes, just to make sure that, the calls that we are doing may be handled by other solutions. So not a pen test solution, but you can see it like a small one. Right, you know what? Instead of speaking about the solution, let's do a quick demo. So we will jump into my lab and I can show you how to run Purple Knight and the kind of report that you can expect. Right. So this is Purple Night. Basically just a zip file that you download from Semperis or Purple Night website. You unzip this on any workstation of the domain, and then you can just execute this. So basically what's behind it, a bunch of scripts, PowerShell scripts, and you can just look at the script. They are open, you can read them, you can understand what the scripts are doing. But of course, this is signed script. So when we are loading all the scripts into the solution, we are checking that nobody did any modification to the script before loading them. Right, so let's start Purple Night and let's assess this environment. So this is my lab, a very basic environment, just one forest, one domain, 2 domain controllers, and we will do a very quick scan of this. So first, I need to accept the license agreement. It's a complete offline tool, so don't be scared. No data will move back to Semperis. There's no outgoing connections. It's just running completely offline. Next, then I will select the environment I'm part of. So basically, this is the domain I'm connected to. Select. Next. And now I have the list of all the indicators that we are carrying. So for each indicator, you will find, the severity, why the MITRE attack corresponds, why it's important, short description, why it could be a potential compromise. And in the report, you will find also additional information on how to fix those issues. And then once I selected all my scans, then I can run the tests. So it will take a few seconds. Well, in my environment, as it's a lab, it will take a few seconds. In a real world environment, you can expect like 10-15 minutes to have a scan. The biggest environment we tested it so far, we're speaking about over 200,000 users, 300 DCs. It took 4 hours. So even in a massive environment, that can be quite quick. So this is the result. We have a first report, 84. Well, 84%, you will only see this in a lab or in a very up-to-date environment. We will focus on the full report now. So you can save the report as a PDF file, as an HTML file, whatever. We'll take a look at this one. So I know that I have 15 IOEs that have been found. Let me just zoom a bit if I can. Yeah, that would be better. So we have those vulnerabilities under 3 different categories. The first one would be critical IOEs. That's not IOEs anymore, that's IOCs. It's really indicator of compromise. It's either your environment has already been compromised or there's something ongoing. So we can find indicators like usage of Mimikatz. And for those that don't know, Mimikatz is one of the well-known tools to compromise Active Directory, even if it wasn't designed for, but now it's used to compromise Active Directory. Then we can find, very up-to-date indicators like the print nightmare ones from this summer. We also include the Petit Potam one from also early September. So basically, you have all the ongoing, vulnerabilities and misconfiguration that you can expect from an AD standpoint. So if we go to the read more part, for each indicator, you will find, as I said, all the information about the framework, description, likelihood of compromise, and the results. So in my environment, I have those 5 accounts that have DC sync rights. Obviously, DC sync could be problematic because that means those accounts are able to gather a lot of information from the replication API directly. So that's a challenge and that's a problem because obviously from the replication API, you can get information like passwords. So for one of them, I can understand that, that's the MSOL account from Azure, Azure AD Connect. So that's fine. That's normal. For all those 4 remaining ones, that's not normal. It's not, you can't have user having such right. So you have the remediation step that is just make sure that the account that you see here are legitimate to get this privilege. And obviously those 4 accounts, they are not legitimate to get such privilege. So I will go back into my AD and fix those issues. So for each and every IOE, IOC that we discover, we give a bit of guidance to be able to fix this and improve your security posture. So that's the first part. Second part, we have a warning level, which is basically could be linked to the critical ones. Could be also, additional information like, user will hold password, privilege account with password never expire. That's a problem from a security standpoint. But let's have a look at this one. This environment has an ongoing compromise. Why? Because I can see that Mimikatz has been used here. So Mimikatz is mostly used to inject information into AD objects. If I continue searching into this, I can see that I have recent changes in SID history for object. And well, that looks like a bad actor that is in my system. And for those that know AD very well, you know that 1116, that's not just a normal SID, it's the domain admin one. So it looks like Mimikatz has been used to change the SID history of this account and inject something. And if I move to the next one, I see that I have another indicator that says I have well-known privileged SID in SID history. So that's an actual proof that I have an ongoing compromission. And that's the same account. So just by doing this assessment, I'm able to say this environment has a big problem because there's someone in the environment. So that could be, triggering a few indicators that show you that the actual threat in the environment. And, last also, but not least, some informational one, it's protected user group that is not in use. So it's best practice from AD that is not that much followed, but you should consider this if you want to harden your environment. So you have this 75 indicators. You can just look at all those indicators one by one. We won't go through all of them because obviously it will take a few hours, but you can have this, you can run it multiple times, up to 5 times on the same environment, just to make sure that you're in a better and safer situation after running your assessment. And of course, you have, once it's run, you have the output here that can be used, the HTML version, but also an Excel version. The Excel version contains all the results. So if you want to do remediation, and if you have your own PowerShell script to do your remediation, you can use the Excel file as a source for your script to then do your remediation. So we're providing basically everything that is needed to then do the remediation. Right, let's go back to the presentation for some seconds. So we spoke about, doing a vulnerability assessment on the environment. It's crucial if you want to be in a safer state. But, there's an ongoing threat at the moment. Well, it's from 2020, but obviously we still see a lot of people with that vulnerability still in their environment. That's the zero logon. And zero logon was quite a huge one because you can basically compromise an environment in just a matter of a few minutes. It's using the NetLogon remote procedure call to fake the authentication, and then after a few brute force on a DC, reset the password of a DC. So once the password is reset, obviously to a blank value, then you can connect as the DC itself on the machine, and then basically you have the key of the kingdom. So it's quite complex, but it's fairly now easy to use because there is a lot of proof of concept that have been created over that vulnerability. And you can basically have a privilege escalation in like 3, 4, 5 minutes. So from 0 to hero, or well, not hero, but nearly hero, in just a few minutes. So if someone gets the first access in your environment, just a workstation, and is able to boot on a Kali Linux or any Linux distribution, you can use just a few scripts and destroy your entire environment. So this is something that you should really care about. It's just 2 patches from Microsoft to apply, and after a few configuration to do on the registry of the DCs, and then the vulnerability is fixed. But now, this one is from August 2020, so over a year ago. But this one we still see this vulnerability in lots of environments. So you know what? Instead of speaking about zero logon, let's have a look. Coming back to my lab, so I have here another DC. That's another environment. This environment, just a 2012 R2 server, but I didn't patch that server that much because I was a lazy admin. But I've done an assessment. It's fine, and 92%. That's barely perfect. But as I said, I completely forgot to fix this vulnerability. I don't have the correct patching level. I don't have the right keys, and I still have one DC that is vulnerable. So you don't need to have all your DCs affected by this vulnerability. It could be just one, like the one DC on a remote side that, everybody forgot about it. It's been in 2012 or two since years, nobody's taking care about this machine. That could be basically a nightmare. So moving into a Kali Linux, I could use this. I can boot this from any workstation that is compromised. So I downloaded a few tools that are completely available on GitHub. I won't give you the link because obviously I don't want people to use this vulnerability, but that's fairly easy to find. And first, I will use a Python script to connect to the DC, do some brute force on the DC, and reset the DC password. So the computer object will have a blank password after this one. It's just one script. And now that's it. I use the zero logon vulnerability just to reset the password of the DC itself. Fairly easy, just one command, script available on GitHub. Now that the password is blank, I can connect on the DC as the DC itself and try to export the list of hashes. So all the hashes that already logged in once on that machine. That's just another script that I downloaded. And I will connect as the DC with no password. That's it. I have all the hashes from the existing account, including the admin. So I can use this to connect to any workstation, including the KRBT account. So I can forge a golden ticket now, and also the DC itself. But I can have multiple accounts now. I have multiple access to the environment. So what should I do? Well, first I will dump those hashes into a text file because I want to be careful. Done. Now what I will do is I will just use the administrator hashes to connect to the environment. So let's take this. That's the actual hashes, and you can use the hash to connect to a machine. You don't need the actual password, you just need the hash. So using the hash, I can connect to the same DC, not as the DC itself, but now as the administrator. And I have a shell. Basic command, who am I? Done. I'm the admin of the domain. So we are completely done. So now there's just a last action to do. I just don't want to, have some evidence that I connected. So I will export a few information, like a few information from the registry, just to make sure that I have an offline copy of, all the information from the registry. That will be useful to have remove my evidences. So exporting a few files, the system hive, the SAM hive, and the security hive, basically the three you need to have everything related to security from that machine. And then after, I will download them and of course, delete them from the system. So once again, just generating a few files on the DC, downloading those files, and then deleting those files. Now I can disconnect from the DC, and guess what? I have everything I need on my workstation now, using another command to then use the hash. So voila, I have everything I need. I have the hash from the KRBT account, the hash from the admin. I can just do whatever I want. This environment is now completely screwed. And it took, I don't know, maybe 3 minutes. So you need to be aware that the zero logon vulnerability is something so big that it could compromise an environment in just a minute without having someone that knows what actually is behind the script. I don't care. I don't know what's behind the script. I just need to download 2 scripts and I'm able to take control on the entire environment. So that's a huge part. And this is why you should care about patching your DC. But that's also why you should care about having a vulnerability assessment, because your vulnerability assessment might show you something that you don't know. And that's the biggest part, is making sure that we highlight some stuff that you don't know in your environment, and so you can move into a better position. On that, back to you, Dan, to speak about what Semperis can do to help in an ongoing situation.
Thank you very much, Matt. Very interesting. Yeah, before I go any further with the presentation, I just wanted to touch on the zero login vulnerability. So Matt and I, as you can imagine, are involved in lots of proof of concepts for potential customers, etc. And literally 2 weeks ago, we were asked to deploy a POC in a customer's environment, and we found zero logon vulnerabilities as part of that POC. They were absolutely gobsmacked, as you can imagine. But that's a real world, environment, a real world customer that we found that in, and obviously they had to go off and do the remediation around that.
And they didn't know that they were still vulnerable because they thought that it was already fixed, but they completely missed one of their DCs.
Exactly. And if you think about what I said earlier on around everyone working from home, so people typically think of that as end users working from home, but actually we're all working from home. Administrators of critical systems are working at home, and the traditional security, physical security around buildings, around data centers, that kind of thing, that's now also less strict because, as I say, we're all at home. We might walk away from our desks, walk away from our laptops in the home environment and shared housing, whatever it might be. So the actual physical security element is also increasing risk to organizations. So as Matt said, it's really important, at the moment you don't know what you don't know. So it's really important that you find out what your current security posture around Active Directory looks like, which leads me on to this slide that you're looking at here. So how can Semperis help you? I think you've got the idea already that we have a community-based solution, which we've called Purple Knight. Now, the Semperis solutions are based on the NIST framework. And for those of you who don't know, that's the National Institute for Standards of Technology. And really what that means is, in the context of what we're talking about today, before, during, and after an attack. Now, obviously, prevention is always the best cure, and that's what we've been trying to drive home this afternoon. So the before stage is really asking you to download the Purple Knight and run that assessment, that vulnerability assessment across your entire Active Directory environment. You might have a production environment for your users to log into. You might have a DMZ environment that you have both access to your clients, customers coming into your environments. All of them need to be looked at and all of them need to be assessed and remediated to make sure that they're in a better place. Matt's also alluded to patching of your domain controls, etc. So again, those kind of vulnerabilities really need to be looked at. So the before stage is really important. So yeah, we really would, encourage you to download PK and have a look at that. Moving on to the during stage. Now, obviously, we would very much hope you're not at this point. But the Semperis solution that we deploy in these kind of scenarios is called Directory Services Protection. Now, what that's going to give you, as well as all of the indicators of exposure and compromise, which Matt's talked about previously, and your vulnerability assessments, it's also going to give you some very powerful tools in the event of a problem happening. So they would consist of obviously threat detection and analytics. So understanding what the bad guys are doing at the time they're doing it. Visibility during an attack is one of the key things that we at Semperis use. We're often called in for incident response to large organizations, and it's that ability to see what people are doing at the time that's really important, because from there you can understand where they're going to go next, how they got in, all that kind of thing. And we do that in some very special ways. We're looking at the replication API, for example, and understanding what's happening in an Active Directory environment at any given time. So that threat detection and visibility is really, really fundamental. moving around the wheel, we look at auto remediation as part of your incident response. So what does that mean? That means that you can scope very specific objects in your Active Directory environments, GPOs, DNS zones, administration groups, whatever they might be, whatever it might be that's very, very important in your environment, you can scope those to never change and to roll back to a steady state should they change. Now, this really does prevent the bad guys from causing as much damage as they have done in the past, because if they try and make a change and it rolls back, then they're slowed down massively, and it takes them a very long time to work out that what they thought they'd done has been rolled back, and you get into this loop situation where they're scratching their heads wondering what's going on. So the during attack phase is really important. You know, we spoke about earlier on is, you know, making the keys of your kingdom more secure. This is one way of doing that. Think of the analogy of your house. You've not just made the perimeter of your house secure, but you've locked all the doors inside. So even if someone was to get into the kitchen, they can't get into the front room, they can't move their way upstairs. This is the kind of thing that we do with the Directory Services Protection solution. So moving on to the next slide. So that in a bit more detail. So think of Purple Night as a snapshot of your current environment, which again, we really do encourage you to do. But then take that a step further and think of Directory Services Protector as a continuous threat analytics across your environment. So you might have thought you've remediated a problem. Someone could come along and roll that back, or something could happen in your environment that puts that into a different state. So you need to have that continuous vulnerability going across your environment all the time. What we mean by tamper-proof tracking is no matter what the bad guys do, we still can see what they're doing. Okay, very simply put. It's a very powerful tool in your locker when it comes to incident response. The third bullet point, we get this a lot when we're talking to customers. So everyone's using SIMs. So if you think about an issue that happens in Active Directory, something that's going to cause you a lot of problems, it's going to make an alert. That alert's going to go into the SIM. The SIM is going to then alert somebody on a service desk. They may not be Active Directory technicians. They might not have the skill set, but they've got to understand what that alert means and pass it on to the relevant group. The relevant group then has to understand what that is and then take an action upon that. So it's very important that you combine those real-time security alerts, literally within seconds and minutes, to auto remediation. Okay, so you remove the human element within your environment and you make sure that sensitive changes to sensitive objects are rolled back very quickly. And the final piece there is governance around your Active Directory. So we come across this a lot with auditing. You know, are you actually, or have you actually got in place all the different things needed to make sure that your Active Directory, your directory services, your primary identity store is compliant. So with that, move on to next slide. So with that, that's the end of the webinar in terms of us talking around the slides and doing a demonstration, but would like to open up the floor to any questions that you guys might have. So feel free to put them into the chat window. And while we're doing that, a common question that we're often asked is, Matt, you did talk about this in your demo, but can you explain the concept of shadow admins? And I know you did touch on it slightly, but if you could just, because I know it's a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah, and you know it also quite well. So basically, shadow admins is you know, having a let's say second access, or having something that might look like, you know, having a secondary access to the environment. So it's usually hard to understand that, you know, if you can just delete the primary access to an attacker, they might have some backdoors, you know. As I said, you know, you can be through CD history, you can have it through group membership, whatever. So it's really important to understand all the ways that attacker could enter in your environment, because it's not because you just cut one that there's no others remaining after. So shadow admins is quite a big topic, because usually once you get the first foot in the door, then you create some alternate one to make sure that you stay persistent in the environment. Actually, there's a question that just came. Yeah, any concerns with running PK on a live environment? No, please do. That's the purpose of the tool. It's just a read-only tool, you know, completely offline. no privileges needed, just a standard authenticated user from any workstation, and then it will try to do some discovery. So we encourage everyone to perform an assessment just to get a few hints about the situation. And if for some reason there's some indicators that are not clear enough, we're happy to spend a few minutes with you just to highlight a few bits and pieces that could be interesting from the report and where you should focus on.
How, in your experience, Matt, you've run these a lot of times. How long do they take in general?
If we speak about environment that are like a few thousands of users, a few tens of DCs, it's mid-size environment, we're speaking about 10 minutes to run the assessment, and then let's say 10 additional minutes to understand the results. So overall, it's half an hour of work, and you get some benefits from the audit.
Excellent, thank you. And any other questions, guys, before we wrap up the webinar? Okay, then. Well, thank you very much for joining. We do highly recommend you download Purple Night. As Matt said, it's community based. Download it, run it in your environments. It's completely safe to do so. It's non-invasive, and it will give you, I guarantee, it will improve your security posture across your Active Directory environments, which can only be a good thing. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found it useful, and hopefully we'll see you for the third webinar of this series of 3. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.